Good evening, everybody, and welcome once again to our Week 6 edition of the DFS show for FootballDiehards.com. I'm your host, Jamie Calandro at JAC3600, joined as always by my fantastic co-host, Eric Romoff at FantasyNav. We are going to be taking you through this 11-game DFS slate that kicks off tomorrow. It's our first bye week, Eric, which, people say that affects the seasonal players more than DFS, which of course it does. But there is stuff to, there's stuff to be said for it for DFS too. When there's less games on the slate, ownership condenses, especially if we happen to get some buys where, several of the top tight ends happen to be off. That's not the case this week, but something like that will condense ownership a little bit more a certain way. They'll be more inclined to punt. So we'll cover all that stuff. But first of all, before we get into it, and we'll do a little recap of week 5. But how you doing? How you doing tonight? And
I'm doing well. I'm hoping that the main slate in week 6 is a bit of an uptick from Thursday Night Football. But what else is new, right? Those games have been kind of snoozers. So excited to get into a bit more variety and hopefully a bit of a faster pace on Sunday.
Yeah. It seems like they plan those Thursday night games like pretty accordingly, where they know you're going to watch, so they'll just kind of pawn off the ugliest game on you, and they just get you with that. I actually won a fair bit of money on this past Thursday's showdown with some of the kicker defenses. Things I focused on the runs. Khalil Herbert, that long run of his, he wasn't very highly rostered, so I used that a lot. If he had just gotten in, it would have been more. Did you play this showdown
I
this
built
Thursday?
All around Khalil Herbert on Thursday. So when he broke that run and it looked like the coaching staff was trying to give him the touchdown to cap it off, that was make or break for my night. Right, I had a fine night. It was profitable, but had he punched any of seemingly dozen attempts into the end zone, it would have been a much better night.
Yeah, they really were. They really were trying to let him finish that thing, and that was especially on that last one where they stuffed him at the goal line on 4th and 1. That hurt for sure. But we came out just looking ahead. We also came out of that game with Carson Wentz. He was already hurt, but he now it's looking like he broke a finger in that game. So just some speculation on your part. What do you think is going to happen from that? Is he going to be okay, or is he going to tape it, or are they going to start Heineke, or are they just going to give it to Sam Howell? What would be your, kind of gut take on that, which we have no real reports on it yet?
Yeah, the reporting is a little wobbly on it, and I think this is where we do the responsible thing and say that we are not doctors. I would guess, if anything, they're probably most likely to tape it, right? But if they don't, if they decide to sit him down for a little while or potentially make the quarterback change, I think it has to be Howell, right? They know what they have there in Heineke, and this team, according to Ron Rivera, according to their own head coach, is a quarterback away. So they need to go into evaluation mode and see what they have in the kid, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would tend to agree as well. I'm not advocating going out and picking him up by any stretch of the imagination, because their offensive line is still a shambles. But if you want to speculate, if you're in a deep super flex league or a 2-quarterback league and you want to make some speculative moves and you have the spots there, that'd be perfectly fine. But other than that, I wouldn't expect finding that next great quarterback in week 7 or whatever. But yeah, so that was not a fun game, but we should have plenty to talk about. The top one that we got is a real doozy, possibly the game of the year so far. But before we get into that, just kind of, remember we're live on YouTube right now. At youtube.com/footballdiehards. If you want to join us and hang out there, if you're listening to us now, you're on there, and feel free to post your questions in the chat. We'll do our very best to get to all of them. I think we did last week, but we're going to also try and get, we want to make sure we cover every game on this slate, because even the lower scoring ones have some significant like single player appeal in them. One I can think of off the top of my head right now. So, if we don't get to your questions, we'll try and answer them in the chat, or you can look us both up on Twitter. Again, it's JAC3600, and Eric is at FantasyNav, NAV. All right, so Eric, you ready to get down to the brass tacks of this week 6 slate and see what we can come up with for some cash and GPP plays?
I am so ready. This is going to be a fun one.
All right, yeah, so fun one. Let's get to the most fun one right off the bat, and that is the 425 game, the national game. It's Bills-Chiefs. This is the first one we've seen. I think I read this earlier this week. This is the first time Patrick Mahomes has been a home underdog in his Chiefs career. So that's quite a run. But it says something to Josh Allen and that Bills offense. The Bills are favored by 3. We're looking at a 54-point over-under, which is the highest on the slate. So, I mean, let's kind of get a few different sides of this. First of all, I'll talk just real quick from the cash perspective at quarterback, and then we can kind of break off and you can give me some of your stacking ideas and how you're kind of approaching this game from cash and GPP perspective. When I make my early builds earlier in the week, I was settling on Tom Brady and for the second straight week. And, when Pittsburgh ruled out so many defenders, which we'll get to when we get to that game. Pittsburgh ruled out so many defenders. It seemed more and more likely that Brady was going to be my quarterback. But now as all these mid-tier running backs have opened up, I find it almost impossible not to make Josh Allen my QB. I think that he is the best value per dollar of any position, arguably, on this slate, just given his role in that offense. This game environment, the fact that the Chiefs have given up the 6th most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. And he has a history of succeeding against that defense as well, including the playoffs over the past 2 seasons. So Josh Allen is going to be my quarterback on both sites for cash. I mean, you can tell me if you are echoing that or if you're going to go cheaper so you can fill out some of the skill positions. But what are the other pieces from this game? Let me start with the Bills side. What are the other pieces from the Bills side that you're kind of looking to do?
Yeah, so I agree that Josh Allen is a pretty clear choice in cash. And really the build that you alluded to is going to be very popular, right? Like the pieces just kind of fall into place very, very nicely. So from a cash standpoint, makes a ton of sense. Looking at the Bills specifically, I think this side of the ball is really going to garner the most rostership, right? I don't know why I'm kind of dancing around it. I think most people are going to head into this week going with the expensive pieces in this game and then going with the inexpensive, specifically running back pieces in the Seattle and Arizona game. And so because of that, we're going to see a lot of rostership, right? Josh Allen might push for 18, 20% of rosters. Stephon Diggs might be in a similar range, right? So those guys are going to be very popular. I think they're fine cash plays. For me, from the GPP perspective, it's really, the call is how do we get into this game without eating a ton of chalk, right? So if you want to go Josh Allen, one way to get different is to really overload stack with players on the Buffalo side. So a Steph Diggs and a Gabe Davis and Dawson Knox or a Khalil Shakir, right? Like, going super heavy on the Baltimore side is one way to get differentiated. I think from a GPP perspective, I'll probably look to get kind of correlated pieces, maybe a 1-by-1 on this game in particular and try to get heavier in that Seattle and Arizona game. But Steph Diggs is in a fantastic spot. Gabe Davis has a very favorable matchup as well, right? You mentioned Kansas City giving up the 6th most points per game to quarterback. Most of that production is going to his wide receivers. Davis, I mean, he's probably going to be a bit more popular than what ownership is showing right now, just given how prolific his week was last week. Keep in mind that was on 6 targets. So, if those are not essentially all touchdowns, he could have a very different outing. So, it'll be boom or bust for him. And then Devin Singletary's somewhat of an interesting piece, right? Like in these high game total settings, usually it is the passing game pieces that draw more rostership. So I think in and of itself, Singletary will be a bit overlooked. Certainly a higher week for ownership by his standards, but not really as popular as some of the other pieces among his teammates.
Yeah, and that makes me really actually like Singletary a lot in this one, especially given his price. With at 5,900, he's surrounding those mid-tier backs. A couple of who you've mentioned already. But Pro Football Focus put out a nice stat earlier in this week where Singletary's snap share has been, when Buffalo is leading, has been at 51%, and it's gone up to over 75% when the Bills are either losing or the game is tied or within 3 points. So I think that's a pretty good stat because we saw last week, when the Bills just decimated Pittsburgh, Singletary just wasn't a part of the plan there because they just didn't need him. So I think this is a good week for him to have a bounce back. He's actually second on the team in targets behind Stephon Diggs. So I do like him. I'm not totally sure that I like him that much as in a Bills stack, but if you're doing a Chiefs stack, I don't mind coming back with him. I like him as just a one-off GPP play to get exposure to this game, as leverage over all the people that are going to be using a lot of the ways that you said. But I think you hit it there with multiple receivers is the way to go here, because Alan Diggs is going to be the popular one, which rightfully so. But I mean, if it's that popular, you're not getting that edge in GPP. So I like the throwing in all of those complementary pass catching guys, as you said there. So what about the Chiefs side? Theoretically, this is a more difficult matchup than the Bills side. We talked about the Chiefs gave up the 6th most fantasy points per quarterbacks. It's also the 6th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers. The Bills have given up the 5th fewest points to quarterbacks and the 3rd fewest points to wide receivers. They have that smothering zone coverage, which is worrisome to a couple of players for me. But how are you approaching the Chiefs? Are you stacking them? Are you strictly bringing someone back with Bills stacks? Talk to me about the Chiefs.
Yeah, so I mentioned kind of the overall game theory for this week, which is I think most players are going to go expensive in this game in their builds, right? So the most popular pairing there is going to be Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce. Not nearly as popular as as the Allen Diggs stack, right? Mahomes does have a very difficult matchup relative to the ones that Allen has. Travis Kelce is incredibly expensive, right? I mean, relative to the rest of the tight end market, right? He still stands to offer decent points per dollar value at $7,800, but he is almost twice as expensive, 70 to 90% more expensive than kind of the field of tight ends out there. So I do think that on the Kansas City side, where people are stacking that side, it's going to be a lot of that Mahomes Kelce pairing. For me, again, where we sit tonight, I'm probably looking at more kind of a one-to-one Kansas City and Buffalo run back as opposed to really stacking this game. For me, I like a lot of what Juju Smith-Schuster has to offer. He should be around 5% rostered, and if you look at last week, obviously, if your name wasn't Travis Kelce, you didn't really have much of a week against the Raiders last time out. But Juju Smith-Schuster was heavily involved. He was out there on 86% of snaps. He ran 41 routes. He saw 8 targets. He saw 5 of them in the red zone. And going back and watching that tape, he was a yard or 2 away from 2 of those catches being 4 touchdowns, right? So those are things that, aren't going to pop on a box score. And I think Juju might be a little bit overlooked, even though he does have, a categorically tougher matchup than his opponents on the Bills side. I like getting into this game with Smith-Schuster, who is relatively inexpensive and has a very large role in this offense, but is not going to have the rostership that should be commensurate with that.
I agree totally. And I spoke about that zone coverage at the beginning that the Bills run. That kind of a thing um, is death to Marcus Valdez-Scantling. With his average depth of
Mm,
target, like they could bottle him up completely. But I mean, those under routes to Juju Smith-Schuster, and he's had 8 targets in 4 out of his 5 games this year. The box scores have not shown anything significant, but yeah, I'm with you, and especially at 5,200, I like him a lot in this game. I think he's a good bring back. I think if you're doing a Bills stack, you want Kelsey as the bring back, but it's hard too, right? Like to do Alan Diggs with a Kelsey bring back and then to be able to get the rest of your roster full of viable players. Gabe Davis is no cheapie either at 6,500. So if you want to do that
not
full
at all.
stack, it's tough to do Alan Diggs Davis with Kelsey like you want. So you got to save money somewhere. So I like the Juju play as well. Real quick before we kind of put a bow on this game, what about the running backs for the Chiefs? I personally am not interested right now because it's kind of a crapshoot. Andy Reid's running a hot hand with them. I think it's totally game script dependent, but Edwards-Helaire is proven capable as a receiver, so you can't even look to say that Jerick McKinnon, if they're losing, he's going to get all the touches. They were ahead for the majority of last week, and he still got more touches than Edwards-Helaire. So, any interest in the running game for Kansas City?
I mean, specifically from a leverage standpoint, I think that there's an argument that can be made for it, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
he's getting these high value looks, and like I mentioned when we were talking about the Bills, usually the pass catchers get a bit more attention than the running backs in these types of games. So he'll go overlooked, right? I mean, I wouldn't be surprised to see him come in sub 5%, maybe even flirting with like a 3.5%. So again, like I was saying with Juju, and I state this a lot because I think it's important. I'm coloring a lot of my analysis on this game around the GPP context because I want to get into it, but rostership of the players and trying to get different from the market and from the rest of the builds out there is tantamount in an 11 game slate where there's going to be so many popular players in this game. So I will have Edwards-Helaire in a lot of my GPP builds. I think you get similar leverage with him as you do with Singletary and some of the other lower owned guys that we talked about.
Yeah, yeah, and I would tend to agree too, and especially the way this game is priced, it'll be an interesting one for sure. But I mean, you said about the popularity, and you said in your GPP builds that there are going to be other ways to go. So let's segue there and move on to the next game. One I'm actually quite excited about, and I'm curious on your take here because I think that we're going to see a lot more attention on this game than I thought too, just because it as a whole now with some of the values is more affordable than this Bills Chiefs game, and that's Seattle, Arizona, um, headlined by Geno Smith, the QB7 right now on the season. I mean, who saw that coming? But so this game has the second highest over under. We're sitting at 50.5. Arizona is two and a half point favorites right now over Seattle at home. So let's start with Seattle because I think more players there that I'm looking at are carrying rostership than Arizona is. So with Seattle, we have Geno Smith at $5,700. I think that he's definitely going to be in a lot of people's lineups at that because you can stack him with both DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, bring it back with a cheap Arizona player, and still get some studly guys in there to fill out the lineup. I've already built one of those myself, and I'm trying to find some cute plays within it. And when we get to that game, I'll talk about one I think I did find. But what's your usage right now for Seattle? So you said you're centered more around GPP. I'll give the cash
Mhm.
take in a minute, but how are you stacking Seattle if you are?
Yeah, so like I mentioned in the last game, I think we're going to see a lot of expensive players and expensive stacks coming out of that Kansas City and Buffalo game. So right off the top, you teed up Geno Smith perfectly. $5,700. will probably be on about 10% of rosters, and he is in easily the second most desirable game to get into. So I am also tinkering with some Geno Smith builds right now. They are a ton of fun because you have so much salary left over. But this is kind of the yang to that yin, right? If people are going to be going quarterback and spending up in the KC game, then going to some of the more expensive pieces in this game will immediately make you different, right? So I'm going to be looking at a lot of DK Metcalf. Tyler Lockett, I'll have some of. I think he's going to be markedly more popular than Metcalf, so that will have me wanting to come in a little bit underweight. I have both of them in that kind of 14 to 17% range. But generally speaking, this game is one where I'm going to look to spend up because I'm expecting the field to try to get their salary relief in this game with players like Ken Walker. We'll talk about Eno Benjamin in a minute. And like we've talked about with the Cardinals all year, right? Their secondary is pillow soft. Literally every single player that is going to run a route for the Seahawks tomorrow, and presumably for all of the Cardinals opponents all year, is going to have a favorable, if not very favorable, matchup with the cornerback that they're running routes against. So I'm a little bit more inclined to go the DK side, just because I don't think as many people are going to be spending up, and there is that price discrepancy between him and Lockett. $1,200 this week. I think that's just enough to keep his rostership measurably lower.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I'll kind of piggyback off that right now as more of a cash player. I'll say at 5,600, there is no possible way Lockett is not in my cash roster.
Course, yeah.
He leads Seattle in receptions. He leads in yards. But that being said, you mentioned the price discrepancy. I think you're right that it's going to, make Lockett more popular. On DraftKings particularly. FanDuel, it's a little bit different because they're priced next to each other. But on DraftKings, for sure, that $1,200 is going to lower Metcalf's rostership. And, it's worth pointing out that he actually leads the team in targets. He's got 2 more than Lockett, and he has 7 red zone targets to Lockett's 1 this year. I also think that Lockett is going to get Byron Murphy and Metcalf isn't, Cardinals' top corner. So I'm with you 100% on that. What was that?
I said top
What was that?
in quotes.
Right. Yeah. Right. But still, I mean, Metcalf's is as soft as it gets. So, I mean, I really, really like him. I will have more of him in GPP than I will of Lockett. And Lockett will be a definite cash game play for me. So let's look to another. Right now in my current cash build, I also have Kenneth Walker at 5,400. I'm torn on that because there are several running backs in this area that I don't really feel that he's someone I need to get because there are other viable options in that same price range. How are you approaching Walker this week? I mean, he seemingly has the keys to that backfield all to himself right now. And he showed, last week with 8 for 88 and a touchdown against the Saints. And this is a softer matchup. So where are you on him?
Yeah, so it's going to be tricky, right? Like figuring out how to navigate this kind of low to mid tier price range for running back is a point of leverage on the slate, right? The big winners of the slate will be determined by choosing correctly here. I do think that people tend to err on the side of really needing to see it first. So relative to Benjamin, relative to some other running backs in this range, I think Walker will be a little bit less popular in the context that he's still going to be very highly owned, right? 15 to 20% is certainly within range. But with some of the other guys on the board that are pushing 25, 28% plus, a little bit of leverage opens up there. And I don't think a whole lot of people use Walker specifically in stacks. So I mentioned tinkering around with a Geno stack, getting a Walker and a DK Metcalf in there. Got a very unique build and construction going. So I'll certainly have my fair share of Walker. Generally, I'm not looking to use running back to save salary this week, so I'll come in under his projected rostership, but we'll certainly have more of him than some of the other guys in that same price range.
Yeah, I'm with you on that too. This should be a fun game. I mean, it's possible that this game is, for a fantasy perspective, as much fun as the one we talked about before. But before we get to the Cardinals too, I'm just going to we have a question in the chat from Mr. Scampers, one of our regulars, who, thank you again for joining us, regarding the DK Lockett situation here. Spending up to get away from the field. He says, with Lockett's late injury designation, do you ever galaxy brain yourselves back and forth? I will say for me that when that did pop up, it's never a good sign when a player is downgraded on the injury report late in the week, especially with a tricky thing like a hamstring. But I mean, they took it away. So, they took the injury designation off today. He's going into tomorrow's game with no injury designation and no limitations. So, I'm taking that for what it is, and I'm using him as if he never got hurt. Are you with me on that?
Yeah, I am as well. Seeing that feels like a gut punch. The good news is that the two games that we want to heavily target are both in the late afternoon window, so a lot of opportunities to adjust course if there is some late breaking news. But with it being removed, I'm expecting him to be full go tomorrow.
Yep, and that's a great point too. We can talk about that as general strategy about using the late games to your advantage, and using the flex position and things like that as well. So, all right, the Arizona side of this thing. This is an interesting one, and I have a couple of ways I like using this. First of all, though, from the cash perspective, Eno Benjamin is 4,600. Connor, Darrell Williams, and Ward are all out. So it's essentially Eno Benjamin and rookie Keontae Ingram. So at 4,600, plain and simple, you're using him. The Seahawks have given third most fantasy points per game to running backs. He's averaged 4.5 yards a carry this year. 4,600, that is more than good enough for me. I rarely like to say push the lock button, but push the lock button on him in cash.
Yeah, certainly from a cash perspective, you skated right past Corey Clement being activated from the practice squad. So because that is so notable, right? But the point persists even with Clement out there. It should be really Benjamin's job, and he should get the vast majority of the workload tomorrow. So definitely a favorite for kind of one of those cornerstone pieces in your cash builds.
Clement is absolutely vulturing a touchdown right now. We just spoke it into existence as a secondhand play. Yep. Yeah. So he's going to make, Benjamin's going to run 60 yards down the field, and then Clement's going to tie his score with that little 1 yard push. How about the passing game here? This is an interesting one to me too, because, I'm curious as to how you're approaching the pass catchers. This is our last game before DeAndre Hopkins comes back to this team, and we've seen what we've seen. But I do want to point out Kyler Murray, who is not getting as much ownership as I would have expected to see in this game, against a team that's given up the highest passer rating and 31 points per game. So, I mean, I don't know what's keeping him from getting more used here, but if it's going to be that way, I really like a Murray-led stack in GPP against this team as well. How about you? Or how are you approaching that?
Yeah, I mean, I've been kind of sprinkling out these breadcrumbs through most of the show, right? I want to go and spend up in this game as a way to get leverage on the field, and Kyler Murray is the perfect play to go out and do that, right? I think part of the reason why his rostership is getting drawn down is circumstantial, right? Most people are going to be rostering a quarterback from that KC and Buffalo game. Part of it is just if you have any shares of Kyler Murray out there, how agonizing it has been to have him on any of your rosters throughout the fantasy season, right? I mean, it is hard outright. And then into the last quarter, really the last 8 to 10 minutes of the fourth quarter, all of a sudden, it becomes it becomes Konami code time, and he's making people look silly. He's doing stuff with his legs. He's threading the needle with his passes, and with him all the way up at $7,300. I mean, I'm seeing projections for him to push for 10% rostership. I wouldn't be surprised if it's actually comes in below that. And he is very much so a target that I am going to have. I'm going to be well overweight to the field on, because I want to spend up in this game with players like Kyler Murray, with players like Hollywood Brown and DK Metcalf.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm looking at my Murray stack that looks exactly as you just said there. I have Rondale Moore in there with it. I couldn't help myself with that. $4,200. He's taken over that full-time slot role. I mean, you called that last week. That was a really good one. I didn't listen. It didn't, thankfully, cost me as a win, but it definitely cost me some, gravy on top. But are you still on him? Nothing's changed on that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. For everything that I was heaping on to Rondale Moore in terms of praise from last week, all really still remains, right? He's still in the low 4Ks. His involvement in the offense actually somehow walked up. His snap share last game was over 90%. He ran 5 more routes. He saw 3 more targets. It's not like he set the world on fire, right? He had a 13-point day. So very good points per dollar value. I do think this week he's going to be markedly more popular than he was last week, right? He was kind of, low single digits. I think he might be kind of, the 8 to 10% range. His matchup specifically coming out of the slot is so, right? Like he's going to see some Kobe Bryant. Kobe was someone that we were picking on a fair amount through the majority of the season. He's actually tightened things up a little bit. He's not the doormat that he was through the first couple weeks of the season, is probably a better way to put it. So, something to consider, but ultimately a guy that is going to be on the field 90% plus of snaps in a game that you want a lot of exposure to is someone that will definitely be in my player pool.
Yeah, and it's at fairly over 4,000 too. I mean, he makes so much work there, and he's got some upside. So I agree with you on that. Anything else from the Arizona side that you want to touch on before we move on?
I mean, those are the big pieces, right? If you're max entering anything, AJ Green should be in your rotations. Zach Ertz will probably be one of the more popular tight end pieces, just because he's the best of the non 7K category, right? So he should probably have him, and Higbee really should probably split the difference as the two most popular tight ends. So keep that in mind in a cash game. Go with the flow there. In a GPP. Maybe try to fade your Ertz exposure unless you're overloading on the Arizona Cardinals.
Yeah, I do like Ertz. I wish he was a little bit cheaper, but I mean, he does have double-digit targets in 3 out of the 5 games so far. I'm having a tough time with Seattle ranks. If you look at their thing, they're last in the league against the tight end position, and they've allowed by far the most fantasy points per game. But I mean, a lot of that is Taysom Hill from last week. So sure. I really don't think that we should put. They're a bad defense, but I don't think we should single out the tight end position as like their true soft spot there. I don't think you should go in there locking Ertz in just because of that particular stat. I do like him, like you said, but I do think there are other pieces on that thing that I would go to first.
Yeah, if you factor out last week's game, they're still third, right? So they go down a couple of spots. Yeah. They move from 26 fantasy points per game to 19, which is there's a pretty big clustering in that kind of top third of the league in terms of favorable matchups. So still a good matchup, but certainly shouldn't expect nearly a 30 burger from Zach Ertz this week.
Right. Yeah. I don't think unless he gets that 75-yard run that apparently they give up to tight ends.
Right.
All right. So that's the other big one here. We're going to move on to the rest of this slate momentarily. First, we're going to go back up. We've had Marco Tucci's had a question sitting there for a while, so let's just get to that real quick. He says, I'm 1-4. What should I do to try and make the playoffs this season? My team is Russell Wilson and Jared Goff at quarterback. I'm assuming you start just one. Mixon, Breece Hall, Damian Pierce, Alvin Kamara, Michael Pittman, Rashad Bateman, Jahan Dotson, Corey Davis, Allen Robinson, and then Tyler Conklin and Dawson Knox at tight end. Oh, he's got it. PPR redraft, 2 flex, 1 QB. I mean, your running backs are fantastic. Your tight ends are awful. Your wide receivers should be better than they are. The quarterbacks are passable to me. So, I mean, what do you think there, Eric? You got to get another tight end. I mean, Knox and Conklin have a better chance of zeros every week now than actual production. Than, I don't know, zeros is a little extreme, but I mean, total bottom floors, less than 5 points a game. I don't think you can roll that out weekly. I got to do a little better than that there. And then the receivers, I don't know, maybe one of those running backs trades for some wide receiver and tight end depth, even if it's not a superstar. What do you think?
Yeah, I've got a similar read, right? From a tight end perspective, right? Like if you have a so-so tight end, you're in very good company amongst your league mates, right? So
Yeah.
I would even consider looking at the wire, right? See if like an Evan Ingram is out there. Might be someone that you can go pick up and get just an incremental improvement at the position without having to really give anything up. You can certainly drop whichever of those tight ends you feel like it because you don't need to roster both of them.
Yep.
And with the with the roster as a whole, I would be looking to trade from the running back position, the area of strength, to get into an improvement at the wide receiver core. Right, your core is very boom or bust. I don't want to bottom out my running back room. I might look at moving Pierce out of that lot just because the touchdown upside is so limited, and he's got a lot of value out in the market right now. So you might be able to get maybe a slow starting running back and an upgrade at the wide receiver position in return for a player like him. But that's definitely the area I would be focusing, trying to get a bit more consistency into your wide receiver room.
I agree, and I agree with the Pierce thing too. He's peak value right now. So I mean, I would not be opposed to seeing what you can get from him. All right, so thank you for that question there. Let us move on. We got some other games to cover here, and we're going to go to Tampa Bay and Pittsburgh. So the big thing here for me, I was on the Tampa Bay offense anyway, but already missing TJ Watt. Steelers are going to be without both their starting cornerbacks in Ahkello Witherspoon and Cam Sutton, their backup cornerback in Levi Wallace, and their stud safety Minkah Fitzpatrick in that secondary. What is Tom Brady, Mike Evans, and Chris Godwin going to do to this team?
They are going to put a hurting on this team. I wouldn't be surprised if Tom Brady throws for like 6 touchdowns tomorrow, right? They've got their best players defensively, but 4 starting DBs are going to be off, right? So we're looking at guys that are coming in off the practice squad, off the streets, even like the people that are not familiar with this defensive system. So Tom Brady is going to be able to do whatever he pleases back there, and his offensive line grades incredibly favorably up against the quote unquote Pittsburgh pass rush, right? So he's going to have time, and I think he's going to knife this team up tomorrow and really put up a big day. So when you mentioned that you were considering him for your cash game, I think that's exactly where he should be, right? From a GPP perspective, I mean, really the only thing that's stopping me from going super heavily on the Tampa Bay side is just the absolute lack of run back options on the Pittsburgh side that I would feel really even close to good with, right? So I'll get into this game, but it's hard for me to stack to do a one-way stack in GPPs and feel good about it.
Yeah, I agree. I the only one right now, because I was trying to build that as well, the only one I'm actually looking to, if you want that Steelers bring back, is Zach Gentry. I mean, he's free. and he went 5 for 43 on 6 targets when Frymouth went down. Tampa Bay has given up the fourth most receptions to tight ends. Is it something I'm hoping for him to score a touchdown? I don't think he's going to score a touchdown. But, when we talked about Cade Otton last week, you said, if he goes out there and he gets 4 catches for 30 yards, he's done enough. That's all I need from this guy, too. So, I mean, he would be the only one that I would think about using. And I think he's, if you're punting the tight end position, he's cash playable as well at that free price tag.
Yeah, I like him. I like him there, like we said with Otton. I don't know if he has the ceiling to make it interesting as a run back in GPPs, but certainly has a good path to value.
Yeah, and that's a good point too. I mean, he that kind of like we only need 4 for 30. That's more of a cash talk than a GPP talk. When you want to win a GPP, you need everybody to hit. For the most part. But how about real quick also in this game, we talked about the passing game, and that's easily used. What about Leonard Fournette? Where are you sitting on him? His price has gone up at 7,400, but he remains one of the premier backs in the NFL, despite Rachaad White starting to eat into some of his snaps. Where are you on Fournette this week?
Yeah, I like Fournette a lot. This is a game script where they should be leading a fair amount by a fair amount for the majority of the game. So should see a full complement of work and touches. Really, the only concern I would have with Fournette is, if they are up by 3 scores in the fourth quarter, which is very much so on the range of outcomes. If we start to see a bit more Rachaad White and we see Tampa Bay kind of take their foot off the gas a little bit. Not really in Tom Brady's nature, so somewhat low likelihood, but that's really the only thing that I would have marked in the negative column for him. He is a bit more expensive. Kind of my overall thesis for this slate. I'm expecting most people to use running back as a place to save money. So to go to a more expensive back, create some interesting leverage in tournament settings. So I'll definitely have him in the pool. Even though his price tag has gone up a good chunk of change, several $100s from last week.
Yep. It's actually, I'm looking. Oh no, it was 7,000. I'm looking. It's over almost 1,000 from 2 weeks ago. So he is on the rise there. But yeah, I'm with you on that too. Okay, so we'll move on again. And this is an interesting one. You mentioned, paying up at running back versus saving at running back, and this next game has an option of both of our, those categories from either side, and that is the Rams and Panthers. PJ Walker is starting for Carolina, who is notably a bad quarterback. So let's look at the Rams side first. In all seriousness, Cam Akers, we still don't know what's going on with him. We wish him the best, dealing with some personal issues. But from a fantasy standpoint, that puts Darrell Henderson at $5,100 in a premier spot here. He is going to be quite popular this week. I'm still undecided on how I'm going to use him. He is definitely one of those cheap running backs that you can use in cash for sure. In GPP, I'm going to be kind of monitoring that ownership a little bit and see where he stands with the rest of those guys in that tier. So talk to me about Henderson real quick too. What's your feeling on him?
Yeah, Henderson should be on the cash game radar for sure, right? I mean, he has just such a clear opportunity in front of him. Carolina allows the 8th most points per game to opposing running backs on the season. So he's about as safe as it comes, right? For me, he'll be popular, but again, he's probably going to be on half as many rosters as some of the other guys we talked about, the Benjamins, the Ken Walkers, a player to be named later, that are all kind of in this lower to mid price range. So he offers some interesting leverage. For me in tournaments, I mean, there's almost nobody on the Carolina side that I want to try to correlate a run back with. So if I'm playing Henderson, it's as a one-off piece, and that's generally something that I do less often, right? So not going to have a ton of him, but it's more circumstantial than anything to do with the position that he's in or his rostership or anything like that.
Yeah, yep. I would tend to agree there as well. How about Cooper Cup? I've built several lineups already right now, and I don't have him yet, and I don't know if I'm gonna. And it feels just wrong to me right now to be saying that. You know, he's got an injury designation, but he's expected to play. Are you are you using him, or are you doing kind of what it looks like the field is going to do, and that's just use Stephon Diggs, just use the Bucks wide receivers. Jamar Chase is going to be more popular than him if T Higgins is ruled out. What's your take on Cup?
Yeah, so for Cup, for me, it's going to be one of those right before lock calls, right? Maybe about an hour or so before, as we see inactives come out there. If his rostership drops much further than where it is right now, I'll absolutely pivot and have a good amount of Cooper Cup. Directionally speaking, I'm spending up more at the running back position, so I'm heading in without a plan to have a ton of Cooper Cup, but to get Cooper Cup at 5 to 8% owned is very much so something that I do want to do. I would like to go to there, right? So I'll have to check the ownership in the morning and see how that's shaking out. But certainly in a fine spot. J.C. Horn has been ruled out. He's easily their best coverage corner. Cup wasn't going to see a ton of him coming out of the slot, but the other matchups that he would face, he can easily take advantage of. So it'll really be a morning of rostership consideration for me.
Yep. That's an interesting one too. And then we'll quickly mention Higbee, who you already mentioned when we talked about that tight end position with Ertz. Higbee is leading all tight ends in both catches and targets. And right now it looks like he's got a slight lead on Mark Andrews for the highest rostered tight end. So I think that's fine to be playing him in cash there. Any interest in GPP real quick before we go to the other side?
Not necessarily. He'll be in the pool. I'll probably be a quarter of that exposure to him in my pool relative to his 12% or so rostership projection now. So for me in tournament, it's all about correlating those run backs. So not going to have a ton of exposure to this game. So we'll probably look elsewhere at the tight end position. But Higbee is in a spot to do just fine.
Yep. Yeah, that's a nice floor play there. So before we talk about, I think, just one player on the Panthers side, we do have a question that we can kind of tie into this. So Wesley Dodd is asking Aaron Jones or Darrell Henderson, non-PPR. For me, it's still Jones, although I get it. I think, in essence, we definitely know his role. I think Henderson is, like you said, safe, but they do have Malcolm Brown. They do like him in that offense. He does, he's been noted to excel in pass protection, which is sometimes a detriment to the other running back. I like both, but I still give the edge to Jones. What about you?
I'm right there with you, and they're neck and neck, right? They're 9 and 12 in my rankings this week. So, a lot of that has to do with the book of work that Aaron Jones has out there, and just how prominent he is in this offense. There are many, many more weapons on the Rams offense that they will go to before they go to Darrell Henderson, whereas Aaron Jones is close to the centerpiece of this Packers offense, and that's why I give him the nod.
Yep. So we're in lockstep there. All right. So real quick, just on the other end of this game, Christian McCaffrey doing what Christian McCaffrey does, certainly not with quite the upside that he's done it in the past based on his quarterback play, but we're seeing single-digit rostership at 8,300, which is about $2,500 cheaper than what peak McCaffrey used to be. He's definitely in that spend up range that we talked about in GPPs while everyone else is playing the mid tier for me. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, he's a really interesting way to get leverage on the field. I'm not going to feel particularly good about it The Rams are allowing the fewest points per game to opposing running backs on the season, and they're also particularly tough against pass catching running backs. They're averaging like 3 receptions for 20 yards to running backs catching the ball out of the backfield. So, I mean, for McCaffrey, for him to pay off that price tag, it's got to be a very heavy volume day where he's catching a lot of passes and he gets into the end zone, and that's a lot of qualifiers that we're stacking up onto that answer, right?
Yep. And Walker is definitely, we McCaffrey is quarterback proof. He's proven that. But I mean, Walker is bad. I mean, people are thinking that Mayfield's done so bad that there's going to be some boost. There's not going to be a boost. I mean, we've seen how bad he is. This is a team going for the first pick in this draft, I think. All right, so that is Rams, Carolina. Moving along, we got about 20 minutes left, and we're actually pushing along to the end here. Giants, Ravens. My 4-1 Giants. I'm ecstatic about this. And this game has some sneaky fantasy appeal, right? I mean, on both sides. I think if we're talking Giants, I'll kind of get into this a little bit. The place we're looking to go first and foremost is Saquon Barkley. They are 4-1 because they've been finally utilizing him to his fullest, and he's healthy and he's responding. He's played 85% of snaps. He leads the NFC in both touches and rushing yards, and he leads the Giants in catches. So they're just utilizing him. They are riding him as far as they're going to go. Ravens have given up 5 yards per carry and the second most receptions to running backs. Barkley's price is inexplicably dropping despite all this. He was 8,000 last week. He was 8,200 the week before. He's 7,700 this week. There's just no reason for it. And if they're going to go 5-1, which I really hope they're gonna, it's going to be on his back because their receiving core is pitiful, right? So is he in your spend up pool for those running backs?
He is, but we've talked about the cynicism that DFS injects into your veins over the years.
Yeah.
When you say that he's inexplicably dropping, it's just like alarm bells are going off. It's like, why? Why is he dropping? This shouldn't be happening. But all gut feel aside, right? Like this Ravens defense is better at slowing down the run game than they are at impacting the pass game, but they're not particularly good at either, right? They're kind of middle of the road. And the two stats that you mentioned are the ones of note. 5 yards per carry are letting receivers, or rather running backs, catch balls out of the backfield left and right. That is a specialty of Saquon Barkley. So I do have him in my player pool. I'll also have a fair amount of him. I kind of like building around this game as a way to get very different from those that are going to be focusing their attention on the 2 afternoon games that we talked about earlier, right? There's several players that can get you some ceiling in this game. So Saquon Barkley is certainly one of them, and he is in a very advantageous spot and is finally getting the workload that we've all been waiting for.
Yeah. So, and you mentioned this game. So talk to me about the Ravens. The Giants don't have their top 2 corners. Their safety play has been incredible, but they don't have their top 2 corners. Adoree Jackson's out, and he's been playing very well. And Aaron Robinson is on IR now. So, Lamar is in 2019 MVP form, Lamar. Rashad Bateman's out, but Mark Andrews is once again the tight end 1 here. So are you looking at that pairing against this Giants team?
Yeah, I certainly think that's one of the pairings to look at, right? I am so incredibly bullish on Devin Duvernay, right? Like I got to see a fair amount of him playing down here in Central Texas at UT. Mm-hmm. I was kind of surprised at Greg Roman's inability to find a way to get him into the offense. Greg Roman kind of stumbles with a lot of that stuff anyways. So, now that he is forced to get that opportunity, he's rising to the occasion, right? He's his routes are week over week, coming off of a 7 target game where he had 5 for 54. Certainly not quite the ceiling that you're looking for in GPPs, but relative to his price tag, and specifically with those cornerbacks that are going to be out for the Giants, in a really good spot. to potentially get to that ceiling. He led the team in air yards last year, so they're looking for him on those big chunk plays with a backup cornerback in there. His odds of hauling those in certainly go up. But yeah, Duvernay, obviously Lamar Jackson, who I think is actually statistically outpacing his MVP season right now, which is weird to say out loud. As well as Mark Andrews, all very much so guys that I have a ton of interest in, and I will have several other side of the coin builds where I'm really focusing in on this game and trying to get ancillary pieces in the games that are going to be a bit more popular.
Yeah, and just real quick, I do like Daniel Jones in this as well, just because he's actually, he's third in rushing yards among quarterbacks, behind only Lamar and Jalen Hurts. And the Ravens are also giving up a lot of production on the ground to quarterbacks. The problem with that is there's nobody that I'm at all interested in as far as his receiving core. So if I'm playing Daniel Jones, I'm doing it just, and in GPPs, I like to stack, and I'm not playing him not by itself. I guess I could get on board with a Jones Barkley stack and come back with Andrews, but it's just not a build that I've found myself gravitating to.
Yeah, I mean, Barkley is the stack with Jones for sure, mm-hmm. Right? But the thing about it is, like, you don't really need to do that, right? Like, you're getting so much leverage on the field stacking the Baltimore side of this game to where if you're just running it back with Saquon Barkley, I mean, you have a very unique texture to your lineup. If you really want to go all in on this game, Darius Slayton should be in your player pool, right? He'll probably be the 3 to 5% rostered. Exposing yourself to him on a commensurate rate is fine, but you're introducing a lot of risk, right? And to my point with Daniel Jones, unnecessarily so. You're highly leveraged by getting off of those first two games we talked about. So no need to get too cute and go fishing in the Giants wide receiver room.
Agreed. And that's important to remember too, that sometimes just the game itself is enough. You don't have to find cute builds within that same game. All right, so that's Giants Baltimore. We do have another question. We'll get to it in a second, but I want to make sure that we at least touch on all these games. We have about 15 minutes left. New England, Carolina. Excuse me, I did that. I knew I'd put that in the show sheet, and I was going to make the mistake as we did it. New England, Cleveland is one here that we're looking at. From a game perspective, it's not the best one, but I mean, we have to talk about one of the top overall values in this game, right? And that's Ramondre Stevenson, $6,000. Damian Harris is expected to be out for multiple weeks. When he went down, Henderson went off on 21 carries. I know Belichick does not like feeding just one running back, but he's forced to right now, and Stevenson gets a Browns squad that is giving up 6 yards per carry so far this year and won't have Clowney again. So once again, with that lock button talk, I don't like saying it, but he's in 100% of my cash lineups. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, he should certainly be right there. The only thing that is preventing me from saying lock button is there are just so many viable options right around this price tag to where I think it's fair to rotate in from those pool of guys, even in cash, right? Your point about Bill Belichick being a little hesitant to just give the entire workload to a singular player is fair. So maybe that represents a bit of downside, but I mean, really, looking at this game, I think there are shades of last week, right? Austin Eckler was someone that was rostered in about 5% of builds, and if you had him in your lineup, he had a very good day for you, and you very likely saw a lot of gains, right? So I think Ramondre Stevenson, slots into a very similar sort of outcome, but is $6K instead of $7.5 that Eckler cost us last week.
Yep. Yep. But to your point, you're right there, because if you need that extra couple of $100, that's why we don't like to say the lock button, because if you do need that extra couple of hundred to fill out your team, and, it's the choice between Stevenson at 6,000 and Ken Walker at 5,400, don't hesitate to make that switch. But I have Stevenson as my RB3 this week. And at that price, he's someone I'm aggressively trying to get in. The game script really doesn't matter to me either, because Cleveland is 2.5-point favorites, but Stevenson has proven to be part of the passing game too. So I don't think there's a script in this where he doesn't offer a floor and a ceiling. Anyone else in this game? I've found myself not really having any other pieces in this total game on either side for you.
Yeah, an argument can be made for David Njoku as a way to get a little bit different, a player who's got a defined role in this offense. Really, the only other note that I have here is one of warning. I feel like we say it every single week. Don't chase last week's points. Jacoby Myers went off and put up a 24 spot last week against Detroit. This week he'll have Newsome as a slot corner, who is a very tough out. So I'll be fading him, and you should as well.
Yeah, I'm on that too, and they are still playing their third string quarterback. Keep that in mind as well. I do think Hunter Henry, I guess, is a passable cheap tight end if Jonnu Smith sits again, but I'm not aggressively trying to get him anywhere. All right, so that is New England, Carolina. Moving on to the next game, we have Jaguars at Colts. So the big news here is that Jonathan Taylor and Nyheim Hines are both out for Indianapolis, and that presents us with Deion Jackson, I guess, as another one of those, $5 to $6K range running backs here. So I'll kind of get your take on this game and how you're using them. But just real quick, just some numbers on Jackson versus Lindsey in week 5. Jackson played 58% of snaps to Lindsey's 38, 50% carry share to Lindsey's 42, 49% route participation to Lindsey's 25, and 56% long down distance to Lindsey's 38, and 2-minute offense, he was in 83% to Lindsey's 38. So clearly Jackson was the favored back. Do you think that will continue, and are you using him?
No and no.
Yeah.
So I think he'll be the more prominent back for the Colts, but we have to keep in mind that Philip Lindsay was coming in off the practice squad, right? So they're coming off of a 10-day break with their last time out being on Thursday night. So I do think that they'll try to get him a bit more incorporated. So I think it'll be closer to an even split, probably 65-35, 60-40 in favor of Jackson. But man, they priced him up. Like, if we're talking about him around 4K, 4,100, let's go, right? I'm all for it. But there are just so many other options that have, the clear path to the job in this mid 5K range that I'll probably won't have much, if any, of Deion Jackson tomorrow.
Yeah, DraftKings was prepared for this. I was going to look at FanDuel too. He's 6,300 over there, or 6,500 even. He's more expensive than Eno Benjamin. He's 800 more than Darrell Henderson over there. So these sites were ready for that when they weren't ready. They weren't ready for some other stuff. So I'm kind of with you with that right now. How about the rest of this game? The Jacksonville side seems to offer a load of pieces that are viable, but I haven't found myself getting to any of them anyway. Marvin Jones is out, and Zay Jones is questionable. That could change things a little bit more for me. But Christian Kirk in particular's price has dropped. Where are you on the Jacksonville side?
Yeah, it's tough, right? They have a very tough matchup. The wide receivers for Jacksonville do, right? 11 fantasy points per game to wide receivers, all wide receivers lined up out wide, to all wide receivers lined up in the slot, 11.6, right? So very, very stingy on the defensive secondary side. Maybe we have another Agnew week. I won't feel good pressing that button. So a name to note, but not to necessarily target. And then for the rest of the pieces here, not really all that interested in Trevor Lawrence. There are other guys in that price range I would much rather have. This might be a sneaky Travis Etienne week. His workload and his share has been walking up week over week. It feels like there's a bit of momentum mounting for him. But at the end of the day, he's a player who's going to see 50% of opportunities out of that backfield at best this week. So to spend $5K on him when there are so many other low to mid $5K options, not going to have a ton of him, but something to at least take note of as you're watching this game tomorrow.
Yep, agreed. All right, so we got some questions. We got about 10 minutes left, maybe a little bit less. Let's try and get these last 4 games in and get your questions. Real quick, San Francisco, Atlanta. This game is, first of all, have no interest in anybody on the Atlanta side. I think this defense is too much for them. And that has actually kind of been leading me away from 49ers stacks. But it's fair to mention that they do have a team total of 25. Jeff Wilson's touch count has been 20 and 15 and 18 and 18 over the last 4 weeks. So I think he's fine. Deebo Samuel is doing Deebo Samuel things. Anything for you on this game?
Yeah, I mean it's really Jeff Wilson as a one-off piece, right? San Francisco has a decent total. I've heard some people posit about streaming or using Jimmy Garoppolo as a punt quarterback. I'm not quite there. I mean they've got a decent total, but they're really a team that's just as happy to to gain an edge, to gain a lead, and just kind of salt the game away and let their defense take the reins, which very much so they should against this Atlanta team. I think that they win it comfortably, and it's a relatively low scoring affair, which means that there are not really many pieces on my radar this week.
Yeah, and this is going back. This is 7 straight starts in a row where Garoppolo has been under 30 pass attempts. So I just don't see it from a fantasy perspective. I'm with you. I think they just win this game on the ground fairly easily. So I'm not totally looking at this game. George Kittle is just off my radar right now with his ability to block so well and the fact that their offensive line is so banged up. I just think they're using him in that role because they don't need to do anything else with him right now. Just they're keeping it on the ground. All right. So let's see. What is our next one? We got Cincinnati, New Orleans. This game is a little bit more interesting to me than it was earlier on in the week, just because a lot of people have been ruled out. T. Higgins' status is the big one in this right now. Right now, I've got a build that I'm liking a lot in cash. If T. Higgins is ruled out in this game, that is going to really, really move Jamar Chase up the priority list for a player that you want to roster in most formats here. Where are you standing on this game?
Yeah, it all comes down to the T. Higgins news, right? With Jamar Chase sitting around 5-6% rostered projection right now, if he's ruled out, I mean, he could become, one of the 3 to 5 most popular receivers on the board when it's all said and done tomorrow. A lot of things to like about that in the cash context. Probably a bit of a fade if that comes to pass from a GPP perspective, at least coming in underweight. On the other side, I mean, you can get some correlated pieces, right? There are things to like about Chris Opportunity. It looks like they're expecting him to play. Alvin Kamara is another player that is very reasonably priced for the type of production that he can give you. He's another one of those players that can give you some ceiling. So I would actually prefer to fire up like Kamara and Chase run back if Higgins is playing than if he's not, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and you mentioned Chase Kamara. That I'm glad you did because way earlier in this show when I said I was trying to get cute with the the rest of the expensive builds and those Seattle Arizona stacks where you can rush for all those cheap players. That was it. That was the one I had, Chase Kamara. I love that build. I think it's going to yield dividends, and I don't think it's going to be too highly rostered, especially the Kamara side. All right, so that is kind of that game right now. We've got two left. Let's kind of touch on it all together, and then we'll use the last few minutes to take the questions that we have. So we've got Jets and Packers, and we've got Vikings and Dolphins. So real quick with the Jets and Packers, give me your thought on that game as a whole. I'll kind of touch anything you missed, and then we'll do the other one quick.
Yeah, probably a general spot that I'm looking to avoid on the Jet side. Breece Hall very much so has taken over this backfield, and he is the Jet to roster tomorrow, if any. Solid enough matchup. Now catching balls out of the backfield has fully supplanted Michael Carter in that regard. So Breece Hall is the one to look at there. This secondary for the Packers, they give up a lot of catches, but they keep things in front of them, and they've yet to surrender a touchdown in their coverage this year. So, Jets receivers are looking to have a bit of a rough day in the office. And I will officially say this now until proven otherwise. Sauce Gardner is for real. He is a downgraded matchup at cornerback from this point on out. So, not particularly bullish on. I think it'll be Dobbs that'll see the majority of him tomorrow. So, downgrade in that regard as well.
Yeah, I agree completely. He has looked good. I mean, if you've watched those games, he is looking like that shutdown corner that they use that draft capital on him, and it looks like the right call for them. And I'm with you on everything else you said there too. I mean, Breece Hall is second in the NFL in targets to running backs. He's totally passed Michael Carter, and you just don't know which Jet wide receivers to trust right now. All right, so that one quick. And then Minnesota, Miami isn't really – there's just nothing really that I'm looking at as anything that stands out. Obviously, Justin Jefferson and Dalvin Cook do, but just their pricing relative to everything else we've talked about has kind of got me – not really looking their way against this Miami secondary. And then the same thing with the Miami receivers with Skylar Thompson at quarterback. I just haven't, this game is probably the lowest on my priority list right now. What about you?
Yeah, this one feels like one of those classic last guy in situations, right? Where you're trying to determine who's going to fill in that flex spot. You've got some salary left over. If you've got a decent chunk of change, Jefferson makes good sense. Even Dalvin Cook, right? Miami is allowing the 7th most fantasy points to opposing running backs, right? So these are players, kind of like you can tell by our tone, no one's going to be particularly excited about or going out of their way to roster. So if you have the money and they're in decent spots, don't mind throwing a dart out there. Also keep in mind that Xavier Howard's been ruled out, right? So this secondary for the Dolphins is now exponentially easier to take advantage of. I think the question is just how much Minnesota will need to be throwing tomorrow, right? They should be able to win this one pretty handily. Another tick in the pros column for a one-off flyer on Dalvin Cook for me.
I like it. And I'll throw in the Minnesota defense too, as that mid-tier, GPP play when most people go cheap. Someone will pay up for the Rams. A lot of people will be paying up for the Rams at 4,100 as the other end. Cheap Minnesota defense or mid-tier Minnesota defense. All right, so that is kind of the DFS slate. We've got a few more minutes before we got through it. We got through it finally. We got a few more minutes before we sign off, so we'll try and get to your questions. Probably won't be able to go into too much detail, but we'll do the best we can to enter them. Let me go to where I last left off. So this was another Darrell Henderson question. Corey Bishop says, Henderson or Kareem Hunt? I'll answer that first. That is Henderson for me. What about you?
It's Henderson for me as well.
Yeah, safer role there. Chubb is incredible right now. Not that it's really hurting Hunt, but it's hurting Hunt. All right, Evan 445 with Jonathan Taylor out. Do I start Etienne, Dobbins, or Kenneth Walker? I'll let you take that one first. That's pretty easy for me too.
I would look to Ken Walker first and foremost. Then I would go to Dobbins.
Yep, I agree. But I've Walker significantly ahead of those two, just because we are pretty sure we know the role there. All right, Flufficini If I said that right, I hope I've said it right there. With Derrick Henry on bye, who should I start at wide receiver or running back 2 and flex? Jeff Wilson, J.K. Dobbins, Darrell Henderson, ETN, Gabe Davis, or Olave with his scary concussion. Well, I mean, if Olave plays, he's probably good to go. But we've seen the NFL screw that up this year, so I probably shouldn't say that.
Sure.
I'm going Wilson and Henderson there, with an honorable mention to those wide receivers. What about you?
Yeah, that's exactly where I am as well. I missed how many are needed. If it's just 2, it's those 2. The third one in for me would be Olave. If he clears protocol, their intention and need will be to give him a full workload.
Yep, I agree. How about this one? Henry Johnson, Justin Herbert, or Geno Smith? Can you believe that that's a question and it's a legitimate one? You go first.
It is a legitimate question. I'm still going Herbert. I've got Herbert in as my number 6 ranked quarterback this week. I've got Geno at number 7. I'm banking on Keenan Allen returning, being a nice uptick or a nice bright spot for Herbert this week.
I am looking at my own rankings here, and I have Herbert 7 and Geno Smith 8. So we are right there with that. So yeah,
game of inches.
I mean, it's Herbert. Yep, if it is. All right. And then finally, one more here before we sign off for Corey Bishop again. This is a fun one because you bashed one of these guys already, but Jacoby Myers or Tyler Boyd? I don't want either one of them. If Higgins sits, it's surely Boyd. Is it Boyd anyway for you?
I think it's Boyd anyway. Yeah. Borderline flex play, even if Higgins is in there. That matchup against Greg Newsome for Jacoby Myers is oh so tough, and it is, as you mentioned, Bailey Zappi that will be throwing him the ball. So a little bit safer, but pretty limited upside with either.
Yep, I agree. That's Boyd with a meh to both, and you like Boyd a lot better if Higgins sits there. So, all right, thank you. That should do it for us this week. Thank you again for all the questions. I am about to jump on Sirius XM NFL to discuss more DFS with Bob and Mike on the Football Diehards show there. So if you want to hear more about it, or probably some of the same stuff you've already heard, come on over there. We'll just reinforce some of the points. But Eric, as always, it was a pleasure. I'll be texting you tomorrow with cash lineup stuff. And anything you want to plug before we go?
SiriusXM Channel 88 for more of Jamie's thoughts on the DFS slate. And definitely tag either of us or Football Diehards in your questions as you are rounding out your lineups tomorrow.
Yes, absolutely. Hit us both up on Twitter. Definitely tag Football Diehards. But great job, Eric. Pleasure to talk to you. Hopefully we'll both win some money, and we'll be talking about it next week. And we are signing off. I'm Jamie. He's Eric. We will see you back here next week, Saturday, 9 o'clock Eastern, discussing